Welcome to Sunflower Movement. I am your host, Ashley Buckner. Before we get started, here's a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. I am a licensed therapist, but unless you have a signed consent form with me, I am not your therapist. This platform is not a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Sunflowers bloom in the most unexpected places, and they adjust to remain connected to the sun. Metaphorically, I define these sunflower movements as experiences with people, places, and moments where we feel seen, heard, and believed. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, I am so excited to introduce today's guest. I have actually connected with her via Instagram, and she is a fellow therapist. Her name is Emily Thomas, and she is licensed in Nevada, Utah, and Idaho. So she really gets to offer so many state services, and I can't wait to have a conversation with her. So I just want to welcome you, Emily, to Sunflower Movement. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to connect. And I know we've kind of talked on the phone, but I just want to get to know you a little bit more and talk about just like who you are, the services you offer, and we'll just kind of dive in. And I also I have some questions that we'll get to at the end. I get questions from the audience and the community, and it's so fun, especially when I have another therapist to dive into it with. So we'll get to that towards the end. But yeah, why don't you just introduce yourself to the community and share a little bit about you, and then I'll kind of ask you some questions along the way.
Sure, no, that sounds great. So my name's Emily Thomas. Like you said, I got my master's in mental health counseling at Idaho State University, and I've been doing this for, it feels like a hot minute. I graduated in 2017, so I guess it has been a minute that
Yeah,
I've
almost a
been doing
decade.
this. Oh, that makes me feel old. I still feel very, very young. Um, So yeah, I got my master's in mental health counseling, and in Idaho, I did a whole bunch of different things in Idaho. I worked um, doing substance abuse for a while. I worked as a consultant in a doctor's office. I worked inpatient. So my other half, he's my better half, definitely. He's like, why don't you dip your toe in private practice? And so I opened up my practice in 2020, and really haven't looked back since. It's been a really fun journey, and that opening up private practice kind of led me to branching out with licensure and getting licensed in Utah and in Nevada to just broaden my scope and help people in more than just Idaho.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I was super curious, like why specifically. Obviously you now currently live in Nevada, right?
I do, yeah.
So what made you seek out those states?
So it's funny. I actually had a client who, and with licensure laws, it's so annoying,
It
but
is.
I did a client that was from Idaho, was there for the summer, but went to college in Utah. And
Okay.
we built this really great rapport. And I started thinking about it, and just, I don't want, I don't necessarily want to end this relationship. They're doing so well. And then I actually ended up getting two more clients that were in a similar situation. And so at that point, I just thought, why not? What is this going to hurt? All this is going to do is help me branch out, help me reach more people. And so I did that. And then my husband, he lived in Las Vegas for a while before we were together, and always wanted to come back. So he's like, maybe look at getting licensed in Nevada so that when we go, and we finally did. So that's why Utah and Nevada are kind of the cherry on top of Idaho. But now it's almost well, wherever the need is, why not get licensed there if I meet the criteria, and I can kind of just work virtually from wherever.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's kind of cool how your clients just also inspired you to do that.
Yeah.
I when I got licensed in Utah, so I was licensed in California previously. And
Yeah.
to get licensed in Utah was actually a fairly easy process because I had licensure in California. Was that your experience as well?
It Yes, for these two states. I did look at getting licensed in Oregon, and that secretly, I'm kind of a lazy person. So that was a little bit too much for me. I had to have when I was looking at it, and this has been a couple years ago, so it may have changed since then, but I had to have like signatures from like my college supervisors and
Oh,
different things.
wow.
And for me, it wasn't a big enough pull, and I'd already had other license where there was that reciprocity. So it was a fairly easy um transition to go to other states. But there have been a couple where I'm like, "Eh, I that's a little bit too much for where I'm at right now. Maybe down the road I'll look at it again."
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I'm glad we're kind of talking about this because I don't think a lot of people realize how it works for a therapist, and that just because we're a therapist in Utah doesn't mean we can provide to all these other places. And while some states you can, get cross licensure pretty easily, a lot of times there's huge hoops that we have to jump through in certain areas, and it also really limits access to mental health care. And I think I wish they would shift the system and make it like a national license and have national regulation, but I don't make the rules. I just follow them, I guess.
Right. Maybe someday down the road we can talk with someone on some board and say, "Hey, this would make things a lot more easy."
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, as you know, kind of what inspired this podcast is my social media and just the work that I do with Mormon religious trauma, which I am guessing you're familiar with given the states that you're licensed in and the services you provide. Do you feel good talking a little bit about that and like how you support that clientele too? Because I think you do offer a great resource to clients in Idaho, Nevada, and Utah. And I just wanted to kind of chat with you about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of I'll share a little bit of my story. I grew up in the LDS church pretty heavily, like went to BYU, Idaho for a couple of years, served the mission. Charlotte, North Carolina will always have a place in my heart.
I was gonna
Um,
ask you. I was gonna be like, where did you serve your mission? I want to know.
yeah. So there's a very funny side note. I was driving around town the other day, and we're getting a very popular Southern restaurant in Las Vegas called Bojangles, and I cried because I was so excited. Um, but there are just certain things that the South offers that we don't have out west, and so they're they're exciting and fun things.
Yeah,
But
that's so fun.
yeah, so I served a mission. Grew up in a pretty traditional LDS home. I grew up with both parents. I have a younger brother. Um, the one thing that was I started counseling quite young in my life because my parents had a pretty dysfunctional marriage. My dad was pretty abusive. I learned very young about some of the really high controlling situations within the church. And that was something that was really hard as a kid because you have you have this big church family, you have this big support. And then as I got older and kind of started opening my eyes to some of the things that either did not make sense or things that I felt were very much injustices, it was really tough to pull myself away. And um, I will say one thing that was so interesting. So when I was in my graduate program, I was not a traditional student. I hated college. It took me a long time to get my bachelor's because I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And then when I, I got my bachelor's degree in sociology because that's what I had the most credits in. So I got my bachelor's, took some time off, um, and actually worked out at it's called the Idaho Youth Ranch. A lot of people in Idaho know it as like a thrift store, but it's actually a lot bigger than that. It's basically a campus for troubled adolescents. So I worked there for a summer and fell in love with the kids and just knew right then. I was like, oh, I never was going to go back to school, but now I'm going to. Um, and my first semester in my graduate program, my mom left my dad, and
Oh,
it
wow.
my world turned upside down. And I've talked to my brother about this, just about all of growing up. There were just different times of, why do you sit? Why do you sit? What are you doing? Why? And when she finally did, we both were like, what are you doing? Stay. Like, you go back. Go back. Like, this is, and so being an adult child of divorce is a very strange thing, and brought up things I never in my wildest dreams imagined. Um, and that kind of, in a way, opened, it didn't kick open the door because the door was already open, but my foot was already on the line of, I don't know if I want to do the church anymore.
Yeah. Oh, I
And
just,
so it,
okay, I have to interrupt you because this is like, I kind of
sure,
have chills. There's so much
yeah.
of your story like related to me. I was also a sociology major. I started college as a communications major, and I was going to go into like broadcasting journalism, whatever, like so glamorous. And I realized in journalism you had to write what other people wanted you to write, and I was not about that. And so I switched to sociology. It was like a huge thing in my family, like what are you going to do with that degree? And a couple summers in college I worked at a youth like residential center, and
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh my gosh, I can't help these girls in the way their therapist is helping these, like the girls in the family. And it kind of, that's how I knew that I was going to be a therapist. And that's how I selected this. And then I also want to share that my parents have recently divorced. So 3 years ago, we found out my dad had been having an affair, and then my parents separated and are now divorced. And it's so interesting because I never really thought growing up like, oh, she should leave him, but I never thought my parents had a functional, healthy relationship. And then this happened, and I'm like, it's the biggest grief of like biggest loss of my life, even
Yeah.
though I know that it like makes sense why it happened. Does that, I don't know if that's landing for you. But I
Mhm.
just had to share that, like those synchronicities felt really divine, so I had to share them. So I apologize for interrupting you.
No, oh my gosh, that's a, feel free at any time. I'll tell you what what I tell my clients, and that's, at any time, interject. Like, say something. This is a conversation. So it's just almost the same as being in session,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, so my mom had left my dad, and just kind of the fallout that happened with that was um really, really hard. Side note, my dad was never really all that active in church growing up. So he was very much one of those do as I say, not as I do, um type of influences in my life, which um my husband sometimes gives me a little bit of a hard time with love, where he's like, why did it take you so long to step away from the church? Because you're so curious and a little bit rebellious, where you don't just take the first answer and say, okay, and then move on. Like, and it's true. It's also so interesting for me to look back on my life and look at, oh, I didn't know if I was going to go here, but that's all right. It's going there.
Yeah, go there.
Um,
I'm here for you. I got you.
when thank you. When I was a kid, I was painfully shy. I mean, would sweat through shirts in school if I had a speech. And just, I mean, I look back and now I laugh, because I'm like, oh, that is so not the Emily of today.
Yeah.
Um, and I just look at different things in my life now, as I've done a lot of deconstruction and just trying to make meaning of things. Um, and just some of the experiences I remember, um, I had a home teacher in high school that I had called him to ask him for a blessing. I had a pretty big decision I was going to make, and my dad was the type of person that when he was not active, he would point blank, don't ask me. I'm not in a place where I'm going to do that. Which now I kind of respect that
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
willing to say that.
For sure. I'm for sure, because I don't think that always happens, and
No,
I'm impressed by that. Yeah. Continue.
yeah. And so I called this home teacher and asked him for a blessing, and I remember so vividly him coming over, and my mom was there and asking him for a blessing, and he went off about, you should not be asking me for a blessing. You should be asking your dad. And just feeling so I remember I was sitting on the piano bench in my mom's living room and just oh, and him telling me the story about when Nephi broke his bow and everyone was murmuring, who did Nephi go to ask to go hunt, like where to go hunt? And in my head, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know what you're doing. It's like, his dad. Even though his dad, the prophet, was murmuring all these things, and I just sat there and totally checked out, like very much like, well, now I don't want a blessing from you.
Yeah. No, you're
And
no longer safe.
exactly. And I remember him saying, well, if you really want, I'll give you a blessing. And I said, no, I'm good. Maybe I will ask my dad,
Yeah.
which was a total lie, but also please leave.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I remember sitting in the living room and my mom just looking at me and being like, I'm so sorry. I had no idea how that was going to go. And of course you didn't. I'm not upset with you. But looking at those were some of the beginnings of, oh, there there is a ladder and there is a way that I'm supposed to go about things, even if for me it doesn't feel right, even though I know my dad has said, don't ask me for a blessing.
Yeah.
But that's still wrong.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I think
so
it's so interesting too, because what's coming up for me is there's a lot of vulnerability in asking for something like a blessing, especially like if it's not your own dad, right? And to know that you can't do
mhm,
that, but you still wanted that, and then to seek that out, and then to almost have it be flipped on you.
yeah,
And it kind of is a diminish of trust. It's a betrayal, in my opinion. And I don't even, like this home teacher is doing, in my opinion, what he believes to be right based on the doctrine and the teachings. And this is
mhm,
always my biggest qualm of why it's not trauma informed, because that is not what you needed. You didn't need a reminder that, like, yeah, your dad should be the one blessing you because he's the priesthood holder in the home. You didn't need that. That's not why you were asking for the blessing. You needed a
right,
blessing because that's what you felt you needed, right? And it
absolutely.
and it was such a it's a to me it was a missed opportunity of connection and
Mhm,
being seen just in that moment, like, yeah, I'd love to give you a blessing. Like, thank you for asking anytime. Done.
yeah,
Right?
exactly. And it's so interesting because some people may look at this, and even sometimes when I'm having kind of a rough day, I'll be like, oh gosh, that's not even a big deal. Um, but that really is one of the things that opened up this my own journey of, I am not enough. I didn't do it right. I don't I don't actually know what I'm supposed to be doing, because if I did, I would have known to do XYZ, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that's like to me, and again, and you probably agree with me as a therapist, like trauma is such a broad word, right? It's sometimes the word that we have to just the best word to describe certain experiences. And to me, in that opinion, in that moment, I'm not saying it was necessarily quote unquote traumatizing, but you had a felt experience in your own being, right? Like almost like this
Yeah,
kind of distress, unresolved, so much so that you were like, then no, you're not giving me a blessing, right? Your
right.
fight or flight came right up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it did then. I looking at the time, I didn't know,
No,
right?
for sure. Yeah. We're
And
unpacking it later. Which I think is actually so relevant because in the moment and when a lot of this stuff is happening within this culture, we don't know the side effects of it for years.
oh my gosh, exactly. And that's something, it is just so interesting to me to look back and to look at, oh, that is one of the catalysts of, even still today. Um, we sometimes laugh about it, where when me and my husband, we may have a fight or a disagreement, 99% of the time it's about a miscommunication where I felt stupid.
Yeah.
That was one of the things where the amount of, I don't even know all the word, like I can put all the words, all the descriptors, but I felt so stupid for
Yes.
having reached out for a blessing.
Yeah. And doing what you thought was genuinely what you're taught to do,
Yeah.
and poof, I think that's such a powerful insight too, just to be able to make that connection when in your difficulties with your husband, right? Like that it's not even always about what's happening in that moment with him. It like goes all the way back to this root memory, trauma, whatever you want to call it, right? When you
Right.
felt that significant amount of distress of feeling stupid. And I really appreciate you sharing this, because to me it paints the picture of how complex this really is. And you're
Oh
right,
my
like, oh, this
gosh.
is like such a simple thing and I shouldn't be upset about it. But like, no, actually, I think it makes sense that you were, and like how valid and how you were that's just so vulnerable to me and authentic. And then to
Yeah.
have that rejected. Oh,
Yeah. And it's something that it's not funny, but looking back to see all of the different places where that then followed me.
yeah.
And even, I went to BYU, Idaho, for my first couple of years of college because I was that kid that, oh, that's what my parents did. My parents went to Rick's College for 2 years and then went to BYU, and that's what I'm going to do. And by that time, Rick's College had become BYU, Idaho, and so I was like, well, my my mom is from Rexburg, so I have a lot of family there. So I was like, this is great. Like, I'll be away from my parents, but Sunday dinners with my grandparents, like my aunts and uncles are there. So really, it fit for me. And I went, and then I realized, holy crap, I have way more rules here than I ever did at home with my parents who I know love me. This is weird.
Yeah, yeah, no, wow, that's a big insight. But then you went on a mission. Did you go on a mission before BYU, Idaho, or after?
Sure.
After, okay.
So yeah, so I went on a whim. I decided I was home for state conference, and a gal I went to high school with was like, I just got my mission papers. You should go. And again, timing, I very much like, even though I am no longer in the church, which this is a whole nother thing we can get into. Like, I am very timing, God, higher power, like it's real. Because this was one of the times when my dad was at state conference. He very, very rarely went to church, but he was there this time and he heard my friend say that. And he pulled me aside and he goes, you know, you would be a really great missionary. I you should think about it. And at the time, I remember being so angry and be like, oh my gosh, friend, why did you have to say that right in front of my dad? Because now I feel this pressure to go.
Yeah,
And it truly, it wasn't like that. There wasn't that pressure, but I considered it really, like, was not doing great in college and
mhm,
needed a break.
yeah,
So in my 21-year-old mind, this is a great break.
yeah,
Um, I, so I left on my mission. Um, I feel really bad saying this because a lot of people in the church don't. I hated my mission. I really, really struggled. Um, I My first 3 areas where I was in, we shut them down, which to me was another testament of how I was not a good enough missionary
oof,
because we cl we weren't in my mind, right? This is not true. In my mind, we weren't working hard enough. We did not have the numbers. And so because we did a bad job, we were now closing that down and missionaries were
when
not going to be there.
okay, and so that's what that means. I've never actually heard that. So
Okay, yeah.
so that's what that means. Like if you close something down, it means that you don't then go to that area anymore.
Right. So for the time, missionaries are kind of pulled from that.
Okay, okay,
In my mission, we were over a ward.
okay.
So there would be no missionaries in that ward. Um, and it was so hard. And
Oof.
I just remember,
That's so much,
I
that's so much pressure.
yeah. And I feel like I shouldn't share this, but also I'm not sharing this for my family who's still very much my mom's family is still very much in the church. I had an older cousin who had gone on a mission and did not hold back. And it was a joke at family functions of no one wants to read his letters because they're too honest and all he does is complain. And so
Oh,
on top
okay.
of that,
You didn't feel
I
then you could complain.
no. So
Yeah.
I was a rebellious missionary in the fact that our mission president had said, you get one email. Not only do you only have an hour to email every week, you get one.
Hmm.
I did not follow that rule. Um, I sent my general email for my mom to send to everyone, and then I sent an email to my mom. And I said, this is all of the stuff, and this is really, really hard. And
Yeah.
I hate it. And my mom was very like at the time, like my both of my parents were very supportive. They're like, hey, like we get that it's hard, then we're praying for you. We've put your name in the temple. We're doing all of these things. And at the time I was like, oh, thank you so much. And now I look back and I'm like, ooh, that was just a really, really difficult time in my life.
Yeah.
Now, when I left on my mission and when I'd been about out for about 9 months, my brother left on his mission
Okay.
and he went to Florida. And so we would email back and I got permission at that time. Like you can send your email to your family, but then you can email your brother. And I was like, neat, thanks. Um, because I
I
was
have
already
a
breaking the rules. So I was like, I
I have
don't
a
care. I'm going
I
to do what
have
I
a
want.
yeah, I have a question about this because what's coming up for me is there's like this whole term about like bishop roulette, right? Like it kind of just depends on the bishop you get, right? And some bishops are like, you're gonna have to do these things to repent, and other bishops are just warm and loving and you don't do anything. So is this true for mission presidents, or
Yes.
is it like mission president roulette also? And it just kind of because I'm like that's probably how it is. I feel like that's how the structure and organization of the church exists in general. So I was just curious.
And I will only speak to my experience. Uh, I had it about split in the half. I had one mission president for the first half of my mission and one for the second half. Yes. My first mission president was very much exact obedience. This is how it is. My second mission president was, oh my gosh, we love you. You can't do anything wrong. We love you. And in my missionary mind, I understand why there's the need for both. Yes, that's a question mark because when you have a mission president that is a little bit more lenient, missionaries take advantage because we're teenage humans. So in my churchy mind, I understand why.
Sure.
Um, in my normal person mind, I'm like, that's really stupid. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but anyway, so my brother went out on a mission and um he appeared to be doing really well, was really struggling with depression, anxiety, um, partially tore his ACL on his mission and went home. And we didn't know at that time, but he was like, this is my out. I don't
Yeah.
have to go back.
Yeah.
And he did not go back out. He actually, in church terms, he got into anti, he fell away. It was tragic. My
So your brother left before you left the church.
he did. And I will touch on that. Um,
I'm loving
he,
this story. Thank you for sharing this, Emily. I'm loving it.
yeah, of course, of course. Um, I still stand by the fact today that the one reason I went on a mission was to have compassion for my brother who came home.
Yeah.
Because when I talk to my husband a lot about like, oh my gosh, what are the things I'm going to talk about? Because I could talk for hours on different things. And one of the things that just really hit me was when you grow up and I promise I'm gonna come back around, but when you grow up in a high control anything, whether it's a religion, relationship, whatever, it messes with you. It does stuff with to you because I look back now and I will say I have processed, I've deconstructed. I still do have a little bit of guilt about how judgmental I was and some of the things that I said and did before my deconstruction, because I was the person that if you came home from a mission, couldn't hack it.
Mhm.
Oh, they must be really hard. And I had no clue. I
Yeah.
had no clue. And so I truly, again, like, stand behind the only reason I needed to go on a mission was for that to change.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. I mean, and also too, I just love like the self-reflection and the ownership of like, this is how I showed up before, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then this is the compassion and empathy and understanding that I developed on it. And then it's allowed me to show up differently after. And I really appreciate you saying that. I think it's so hard to do. It's so hard to, because we first have to repair with ourselves, right? We have to kind of forgive ourselves for how we behaved or showed up before we knew better, you know? And in my
Yeah.
opinion, like that, like, what? You like you couldn't go on your mission, you couldn't hack it? Like that was you just showing up how you'd always been taught to show up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Then it's really hard sometimes to look in the mirror. And that's truly, that's part of why, looking back now, like, yes, I loved the kids at Idaho Youth Ranch and I loved those things. I needed a counselor when I was younger, like me.
Yeah.
I needed this is why I became a counselor, was because I grew up going to therapy because of my family's dysfunction and some of the abuse that went on at home. And I remember counselors being like, when you're 18, you don't have to go back. And me being like, I'm 14. What am I supposed to do for 4 years? And being told, what, well, you can't control your dad, and being like, oh, this is so dumb. Why am I even coming here?
Mhm.
Um, and so that's a big reason of I became a counselor, because I want to be for someone else, even if it's one person. I want to be who I needed,
Yeah.
because there were things that were really hard, and part of me, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, we're not even to like the hard things of adulthood and college and dating and all of the other things that come with this high control religion,
Mhm.
and high control relationships and organizations in general, where it's there are difficult things in life. And I think a lot of the times people think that you have to go it alone to be strong, or, well, we don't air our dirty laundry. We don't need to be talking about that. And it's like, this is not airing dirty laundry. This is, you are in distress. Let's get you out of distress.
Yeah.
You've got to have a person that's not in the middle of it with you to help pull you out.
Yeah. And what, you like you shared, I want to be the therapist that I needed, right, at the age. And what did you need? Like what would have been helpful for that therapist to do or say or support you on?
I I think what I needed, one, was support, and the actual, I mean, if I'm being 100% honest, I needed someone to call CPS.
Yeah.
I needed someone to do their job,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to be, because some of the things that were going on in our home, and this is when, after my mission, I came home and I switched to Iowa State University. Um, and I talked to my counselor, and she straight up was like, has anyone made a phone call? And I said, phone call to who? Like, no, what do you mean? And she's like, you are telling me things that are reportable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at the time, I was like, well, not, explain more. And I was like, no one's under 18 anymore.
Yeah.
Like, there is nothing to report. And so I think I needed someone who was willing to do the hard thing and report, but also then continue to be there as I worked through my own stuff of,
Yeah.
wait a second, this is messed up and this doesn't feel right. And someone to tell me, you get to trust that. You get to trust your own intuition in what is going on with your life.
Yeah. I'm curious, you know, like, because I think you're talking about, I'm curious why, like, why do you think this therapist you saw in youth was not able to do that for you? Like, were there circumstances that influenced them? Were they close to your family? I'm just super curious about that.
I don't know. I'm very curious if it's because, and I've got my own professional opinion on this, but like he saw our whole family. So
Oh,
he would do couples counseling for my parents and then individual for all of us and then family sessions. And for me, the way
oh,
that I practice, I don't do that.
yeah, me either. I actually I just actually sent this in an email yesterday that I do provide family therapy, but I don't provide family therapy if a client is an individual client. And if I have an individual client, I won't provide therapy for their family members. It is so messy. And I think
Mhm.
this is exactly why. Right?
Yeah.
Because I'm imagining you, daughter, or like these are all the things that are happening, and parents are like, "Oh no, these aren't happening. She's just being dramatic." I don't know. That's just what comes up for me. So I really appreciate you
Yeah,
sharing this. And I think it's good for listeners to tune into, like, about what like informed care looks like, right? And
absolutely.
why as therapists we don't see multiple family members in the same family unit, right? Individually. It's too complicated.
And I think too, there's a piece of I've been told this by clients, and then I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Of when you have a chaotic system or just things that are going around or things that are going on, and especially with kids, I can't
Mm,
even say especially with kids. Kids are the ones that have told me this, but if you offer, say, like, hey, your mom wants to come in and talk to me, it's like you're mine. I don't know. I don't know what she's gonna say, and I want you to believe me.
yeah.
And so there almost is that you've
Yeah.
got to be really careful with that relationship because of course as professionals we're going to be like, I take everything with a grain of salt, don't worry, like
Yeah.
I could see things a little bit more clearly because I'm not in it, but that can be such a disruption to treatment if
Yeah.
trust is lost or they feel like,
Yeah.
oh, you're taking sides. And so it just gets messy when what it's supposed to be is helping decrease some of that distress.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was like even a larger conversation that we were then able to have based on your story. So I appreciate you opening up
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm
So
curious. Okay, so you were like, then you went, so you came home from your mission, you went to Idaho State, is that what you said? Idaho
yeah,
State
yep.
University, and that's where
Uh-huh.
you got your degree in sociology. And then kind of walk me through how did you like what I know like kind of your parents going through a divorce, but like what was the final thing for you? Did you leave this church before you became a therapist or while you were a therapist? I'm just super curious.
Yeah. So first, real quick, while I was still at ISU, my brother left the church.
Okay,
And
that's when your
and
brother left.
it was very much, oh, he was disillusioned, he got into anti, and he and I have had conversations, and he's like, sure, if that's what you want to call it. Like, I read church history. So, all right, sure. Um, and I remember the time I was still in it and just being like, oh my gosh, what do we do? How do we help? Um, and with my brother, like he's very much like, this is how it is. And if you break my boundary, like we're done. So this is really easy. And I remember being like, how do you do that? And I'm becoming a little bit more like that as I get older and go through things. But so he had left the church and um I was taking I was taking a break between undergrad and grad school. Didn't know I wanted to do grad school yet. Um Other timeline over here. I became really good friends with this guy at ISU. I mean, I would say like we were best friends. Um, he's gay. And so I had this horrible problem of being like, oh, but I really like you. What do we do with this? And he was pretty, he's, I just no, like that's not gonna happen for me. We happen to be in the same ward, and not even the beginning because it does go back further than that, but when I started seriously considering, I don't know if this is right for me, um, was when our stake president pulled me into his office and said, I I know. Um, and you know what, you're best friends. Like I would counsel you to get married civilly, try it out for a year, and then if it works, get sealed in the temple. And,
So
and
wait,
if it doesn't, you can get divorced.
so he was telling you to marry your gay best friend.
Yes. And
Wow.
I remember just sitting there
Ooh.
and just immediately I was like, why would I do that? If we were going to get married, we would get married in the temple. Like, what? And I remember leaving and I went and I told my friend and he just kind of laughed and he's like, that's weird. And I was like, yeah, this is weird. And then things got even weirder because then after that we dated because we were both still very much in the church and he's like, you know what? Like you are my best friend.
And
If
he's
I
like,
get
and
married,
he's trying not to act on his desires, right? He's trying to be
right.
straight, all of those things.
Yeah.
Oh
And
God.
so he was like, if I were to marry any woman in this life, it would be you. So let's date. And we did. And oh my gosh, it was at the time, right? It was great and it was wonderful. And then he's like, I can't do this. And I was heartbroken and I was devastated. And I probably was not the best about it because it was breakup. But he still wanted to be friends. So we maintained this close friendship, which was not healthy for me at all. That was really hard. Um, but then I got into my graduate program, and at that time I wasn't going to church. I really didn't care. I was just like I'm not going to do anything with it, but I'm also not going to do it right now. And in school, I started doing research for my graduate program and like learning all these different things and being like, oh, I knew there were a lot of toxic relationships in my life. Oh no, I have to start looking at this. And so I kind of start like very, very slowly, like dipping my toe and being like, oh my gosh, that's scary. I don't want to do that. And so I wouldn't for a while. And again, I wasn't going to church, wasn't going to the temple, like was dating people not in the church, like and honestly, when I made that decision and I was done, um, was and I don't even remember specifics because I'm at a point in my life where like that, this is bad, but like that doesn't matter to me anymore.
Yeah.
Um, the first presidency came out with a letter about children of same-sex
Yeah.
couples
I remember that.
not being able to be baptized.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's messed up. But that wasn't what broke it for me. It was when they reversed it, which I was for that. I was for
Yeah.
that. But in my brain, in my Mormon brain, it was, that doesn't change.
Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah. Super
And
confusing.
yes. And again, it was also really internally confusing because I did not agree with the first declaration, the first
Yeah.
policy of this is not okay. Like I'm like, people can love people, like it doesn't matter. And the fact that you're taking away choices from their kid, like this doesn't make sense. And so that when it was reversed was when I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I can't do the back and forth. Like I can't. And then I started doing a little bit like I read the CES letter. I started looking into church history. And for me, I was at a place where I'm like, I just that no longer fits for me. It
Yeah.
is it is no longer. I feel very, very fortunate because my mom has always been, I love my mom. Like she's one of the most amazing people you will ever meet in your whole life. And looking back at some of the things, I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're still in the church too? Like, yeah, okay, like that's fine. But some of her wisdom that she had given me throughout my life, like, was just so profound. So when I had left the church, I had met my now husband and we were living together. And I remember calling my mom and bawling, just coming apart and being like, I don't know why God's blessing me because I am literally doing everything that I am not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And my mom, I love her. She just started laughing and she's like, Emily, God loves you. Like, why are you so worried that help me understand? And I just sat there and bawled and I'm like, because I've been taught my whole life that if I do these things, I won't be happy.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
that
mean, and
if I,
if you reject the church, you're I mean, I remember that lesson as a kid. Like, if you reject the truth, that means that's like your sure way to outer darkness.
yeah.
Like
And
I remember that vividly. Like that was the biggest no, the thing that you're not supposed to do.
yeah. And so that has been one thing, like through it all, like, and she's told me, I'm disappointed. Like I
Sure.
wish that you would come back. Um, but that is one conversation I will never forget. And it's something that I think helped me a lot through the process of deconstructing. And I think we always kind of look for approval, even if we say we don't. Um, but having that, like, no, you're good. You're you're okay.
Yeah.
Was something that then after that I was just like, I don't care anymore. I don't these things that have kind of held me down, like I don't need it
Yeah.
anymore. And I feel very, very fortunate because I am with someone who grew up with knowledge of the church, but has never really been a part of it. And so we have some really interesting discussions where he's like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "That's real. That's a real thing." And he's like, "No way." And just some of these conversations that have helped me deconstruct, aside from my own therapy, where they're this idea of never being enough, of not being good enough, of all these things. Because let's be real, I didn't get married till I was 33.
Yeah. Yeah.
And before that, I knew in my heart that it's because I wasn't doing something well enough. I had some sin that I hadn't repented of. Like, and now I look back on that and I do, like, I laugh because it's so comical of, no,
Yeah.
that's not how this worked. And now I look back with so much gratitude that I
Yeah.
didn't marry in the church, that I did
Yeah.
not have children with someone, that all of those things, they are not a concern for me anymore. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. No, I just see you so much in that. I left when I stopped attending church when I was 20 years old. So all of my like collective adult life experiences were happened outside of the church, and I'm so thankful for that. My husband too. He knew like a tiny bit about Mormon culture, but nothing at all. And so when we moved back to Utah, he was like, "Whoa," and we laugh, and I'm so thankful for him because my soul knew I needed him, right? And his ability to see me and to be with someone who wasn't raised with these like you said this earlier, like high control religion mess or high control settings, anything, right? Messes you up.
Yeah.
It like gets in your body and brain and really shifts how you see yourself and how you see the world. And to be with someone who didn't have that programming in their being is and as you know, it's so powerful.
It
Um,
is.
and I often too think because before I stopped attending church, I was in LA going to college, but I was dating a guy from where I grew up, and he was a returned missionary. And of course we were talking about marriage, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to come home and marry him. And I was like, I had some really great friends in LA, and they like, you're not going home to get married. You're like 18, 19 years old, but like, oh no, I love him so much. This is what I need to do. And bless his heart, like I don't have any ill feelings towards him at all. And he was doing what he felt was right. And I was like, I was a mess, at 18. 18 I feel like 18 to like 23, it's a rough time for a lot of us, but I was
Yeah.
a mess personally. And I am so thankful that I was a mess and that it was not a good relationship and I did not come home and marry him, because I think that's what comes up for me a lot in the work that I do as a therapist now in small town Utah, is like, that could have been me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and whew, like, I'm so grateful I made different choices. And also I have so much compassion and understanding and empathy for like the people that didn't have the opportunities that I did, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
just really hold space for them. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that and for just letting
Yeah.
me feel safe to kind of share this. Like, I love this back and forth.
Of course.
So it sounds like you left and kind of started your deconstruction before you became a therapist.
It was right when I was in my training.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was right when I was in school, and there were a couple times where, something would happen and I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I need to go back. And so I'd go to church for a couple weeks and I'd be like, oh no, nope, that's not what this is.
This does not feel
Um,
good in my body.
right, right. And so yeah, it all kind of led up to, these years of all of these experiences led up to when I became a therapist, and working in different settings, finally settling on, now I want to work with trauma, and working for someone else, has its perks.
Yeah, you learn a
Um,
lot.
you learn a lot. For the most part, you've got like a pretty steady income, there's benefits, things like that. And so for me, but my parents were self-employed. Um, and when my husband was like, you should open a private practice, I was like, taxes. I'm not doing that. Like, I watched my parents, like, they were not always great with money. Like, that terrifies me. No, thank you. Um, and it only took him a couple months and a not so great job for me to be like, you know what? I was talking to my counselor and maybe I should open a private practice. And he's like, it's like, of course, it has to come from your own therapist and not from your husband, but all right. Um, and so we sat down and we started talking, what do we want to call it? Um, and my business name it's interesting. But the reason I came up with Avidity Counseling is because I wanted my clients to know, like, I am an avid supporter. Like, I am here. I am ready. I'm going to be engaged with you. I'm excited. Let's do this. And, we were looking at it and just, hey, let's make it a verb. Put ITY on the end of avid. And so that's where kind of the name, for Avidity came from. And those are the type of clients that I work with, people who are ready, who are eager to do the deep dive, even though it's scary. They want to get into it. They want to push forward so that the things that are big in their lives aren't anymore, and they feel empowered and they feel confident in moving forward with whatever their journey is.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
love that. Thank you for sharing that story. And you provide EMDR, correct?
I do. Yeah. So all of my like trauma training actually came after I opened my private practice because I could do whatever I wanted. So
Yeah.
I'm trained in EMDR, which is wonderful. I love EMDR, and I'll tell you, my true love is hypnotherapy. And I will share with you. I my husband is really, really open as far as like spirituality, the universe, crystals, energies, all of these different things, to where I was pretty closed off to that when we first got together. But I saw I saw this training for, get trained in clinical hypnotherapy. And I did not tell him this, but I was like, I think this is garbage, and take this training so I can debunk it. Um, and the first day in training, uh, I came home and I was like, oh my gosh, it's real. Gosh, this is real. Like, this is so cool. And from then, like, I love hypnotherapy. That is probably the modality that I use the most
Okay, cool.
because all it is, like, people have preconceived notions, right? They're like,
Sure.
oh, so you're on the stage like plucking like a chicken. Okay, that's what the type of therapy I want to engage in. And really, all hypnosis is it is a deepened relaxation state, and so
Okay.
you're aware, you're conscious. We talk. Uh, the ethically, of course, right? I'm not going to be like, leave $100 bill on your way out. Like, no, it's ethical. You will never do something that you are not open to. Like, and so it's something that helps. It involves some internal family systems. Like there's some parts work that go into hypnosis
Yeah.
because really we're connecting the conscious and the subconscious mind. And
Yeah,
so
no.
it's really cool. That's my favorite. That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. I don't know much about hypnotherapy. I know quite a bit about parts work, and I think really, I mean, there's like any type of therapy that kind of gets you out of this like but frontal part of your brain that is
Yeah,
like our, well, our, where all of our defenses are and into our own being and into our own body. I mean, there's a lot that gets to happen when we kind of step out of the way cognitively. And that's to
for
me
sure.
sounding like how hypnotherapy works.
Yeah. Yep. And as I say, a lot of, I mean, really, there is a lot of like connecting the mind and the body, right? Like, where are you feeling that right now? Because we are in a way like breaking down walls. And that's why I've had people that are like, you can't do hypnotherapy virtually because right now my practice is virtual only. And to me, I challenge that and I say, I've had clients that have come in my office for hypnotherapy. And the next week they're like, I don't want to do that in your office. I feel so much more comfortable at my own home, in my bed, in my space. And I'm like, sweet, let's do that because I mean, yeah, you are a vulnerable position because your eyes are closed. Typically, you're in my office. I had a recliner, so you'd be laid back on a recliner. I had clients that were like, "Give me your blanket and pillow. I'm gonna lay on the floor." And so there is a little bit of vulnerability that goes
Yeah.
into it, and so it is that no, like be comfortable, be where you feel most safe being vulnerable.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, I think it could be helpful for our listeners if you could maybe like what is something you would use hypnotherapy for? Like what are they gonna what's a target that you would set them up with or something like that? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah,
Like walk
yeah.
us through that a bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I have a client right now, that's really, really struggling with alcohol use. And she like really having a hard time and is like, I think I want to do hypnotherapy because I don't want to drink, but I want to drink. And I don't know why. And so we're using hypnotherapists to or hypnotherapy to kind of tap into that subconscious, and some things that have come up have been pretty significant. She lost a loved one to alcohol poisoning when she was very young. They're old, like and that person was her caregiver, and all of it, like she had friends that at the time she didn't know, but their parents wouldn't let them come over because they knew that the caregiver was an alcoholic. And like all of these things that had built on that she had not made the connection.
Mhm.
And so now we're unpacking a lot of trauma of,
Yeah.
okay, like these are the things that happened to you before, and because for so long you haven't wanted to, it's been too hard, it's scary, you haven't wanted to look at it, it's kind of created a little bit of a problem. And so looking back, and now she's doing a ton of unpacking, and we're checking in with the subconscious of like, how what does it feel like to your body to be drunk? And she, I don't have to be here.
Yeah.
I don't have to be in the moment. I don't have to deal. And so then, coming out of hypnosis and having that conversation of, oh, like that's heavy. That is
Yeah.
so heavy. Like, hey, how do we unpack this? What do we do with this? How do you get to a place where you're okay being present? You're okay being here. Let's take some of the fear out of it. Let's look at supports that you have. And so it's really, um, really it's a way to uncover some things, but also help you make meaning while you're figuring out how to process through and then keep pushing forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like it's very much gets to more of the root cause of something
Yeah.
like using alcohol, right? Which
Mhm.
you could do a talk approach and like, okay, here, let go employ all these coping skills to navigate this. Or you can do this like body-based approach that kind of pulls up, well, this is actually where it's coming from. And if we're going to treat the alcohol use, we have to treat the underlying trauma that's contributing to it, which is very
Right.
similar to, I mean, that's essentially like what I call a bottom up approach, which is brain spotting, right? It's from the inside out. This is,
Mhm.
it sounds like
Yeah.
hypnotherapy is an inside out approach. So I really appreciate you kind of expanding on that and offering a little more insight to our listeners too, because it might resonate with a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I also, for the listeners, I mean, thank you so much for sharing so much of your personal story and journey with the Mormon Church. It offers just, I think it's so relatable for a lot of people. And it just reminds people that they're not alone. And this is a complex, complicated thing. And I also love too is that there's no right or wrong way to figure this out.
Right.
There's so many avenues, and even just from your story, right? The way you figured it out was so different than your brother, and just like all of these pieces. And I love that. I just appreciated that share so much. And I
Yeah.
also, do you work with like clients who are deconstructing or who are maybe struggling with this high control religion, Mormonism?
I do. Yeah, I've got quite a few clients that I've been working with who it's not funny, but they come to me for something else. And
Sounds
then
like
it
me.
kind of yeah, as I say, it like comes back to wait a second, there's also this. And then that we kind of take care of the first thing, but it's like you're talking like we get to the root of why they were coming in the first place. And a lot of it is I feel a lot of, shame and guilt for things that I probably don't need to be feeling shame and guilt about. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, let's do a deep dive. Let's go in, let's look and see how you can feel a little bit better, like feel less guilty, feel less shame because you don't you don't need to keep carrying that.
Yeah, no, okay. Wonderful. And I'm going to, just for everyone listening, I'm going to include all of Emily's contact information in the show notes so you guys can reach out to her. And again, she's licensed in Nevada, Utah, and Idaho. All right. Are you ready to just jump into a few questions before we end today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and read the first one and then we'll talk about it and we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure.
Okay, so again, for everyone listening, every podcast episode, I do Q&As from the audience. And it's so fun to do a Q&A when there's two therapists kind of diving into this. So, first question, currently navigating separating away from the Mormon religion, and my parents are very, excuse me, deep in it, as well as my mom's extended family. We have not told my parents that we are not going anymore and don't align with those teachings. I am married with two kids. We were actually sold in the temple 2 years ago, and it was mainly due to the pressure to want to feel loved by my parents. I feel like a liar by not telling them we don't go to church, but I'm also not ready for that conversation as I know it will be really hard and may result in cut off relationships. I just feel in my heart it's not for me, but I don't know yet how to defend that.
And that's tough. That's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah. I always just appreciate these shares so much and want to recognize the people that submit them. I don't know who they are. It's obviously all anonymous. I think always the first thing that comes up for me when I get a question like this, and Emily, I'd love to know your thoughts as well, is I don't think there is a requirement to tell anyone until you're ready to tell them. And also I that last line, like, how do I defend that? And I think when we're in a place where we feel like we need to have to defend something, it's just a sign that maybe we're not quite at peace with it yet. And
Yeah.
to slow down. I don't know what comes up for you.
Yeah, I have so many, and these questions they're amazing and also so hard because it's one of those things not knowing them, right? Like if this was someone that I had, rapport, had relationship with, we had, you know, that may change the my delivery of how I give an answer. And with something like this, I mean, it's so hard because I think that there's also that assumption that if you leave the church, your values and your morals are going to completely just go out the window. And that's something, it's like, no, I'm still the same person, still like hold the same things important that I did yesterday, that I did last year. Um, and just being able to feel confident enough to stand behind your own values and your own morals, like you said, when you're ready, when you're ready, because I think for a lot of people, they may not even notice because you are not actually changing. And so yeah, this is, I also have the thought that's a little bit more harsh of, if these are the types of relationships that you have, like, is it worth the stress of, oh my gosh, I can't tell them this thing. And of course that's going to vary from person to person. Some relationships 100% are worth that. And so it's waiting until you're ready. It's making sure that you're kind of doing it on your terms, because it's a really vulnerable thing to share with people.
Yeah, no. And also what's coming up for me too, and in this question and what you were just talking about is like so much of this is about like wanting to be loved by your parents. And gosh, that is driven and fueled by so many things. And I would invite this person too to be what it how do you love yourself, right? Because if you're
Yeah.
feeling that that love from your parents is conditional based on your belief in this religion, I imagine there's probably some conditional love coming up towards yourself. And unfortunately, and in so many of these situations, like whatever's going on with the parents is so out of the adult child's control because of the
Oh
parents'
yeah.
own stuff. And as desperately as you want to feel that love, can you give that love to yourself? Can you discover that within your own being? And it's very hard. And it takes time and work and intention. But I say this so often with a lot of people, I mean, related to the church and unrelated. I mean, anyone who has kind of distressing relationships with their parents, it is possible to heal and feel confident and love yourself, even if they don't ever give it to you. Um,
Yeah.
it absolutely is. And it's hard. It's hard work, and it requires you to have to really open up some of those wounds that it sounds to me that you're feeling, right? If you're like, I'm going to go through the temple, even though I don't really want to, and it feels like a lie, to get that approval.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, say you don't have anything to prove. And if you feel like you do, to get really curious about that. And that would be where I would start in a session with a client. Not so much about like figuring out when to tell mom and dad or extended family. It'd be like, how do we work on this relationship with yourself?
Yeah. I think that that's a great point of, it takes a lot, it takes a lot more to be introspective and curious about yourself than it does to have introspection about, it's not even introspection, but to be curious or to have questions for somebody else. And so I think that you hit it on the head. That's a great place to start, is to, be curious about, what do I feel like I need this? Why is this like the top of my needs right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say too, like, you don't have to defend or explain. Like, you get to just choose what you want to choose. And I think, again, when we have that need to defend, that's coming from a place of activation. And that just means that's a sign of a working nervous system. That just means we have some more stuff to unpack there. So great question. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next one, if you're okay with that, Emily.
Okay.
Okay. I wish either of my older sisters who happen to follow you would have cared enough to ask why I left the church when I told them I left. They both told me I was free to believe whatever I wanted, but I didn't leave because I simply don't believe. I left because I learned there is nothing to believe. It's an elaborate lie created by Joseph Smith, and that can literally be proved. I wish they would leave too. I think our mom will. She asked me why. I guess this isn't really a question, it's a share. I think especially too knowing a little bit more about you, Emily, and just like your missionary experience than I actually personally have never read the CES letters or done a deep dive into church history, because I left my reasons for leaving were just so different, and I didn't feel like I
Yeah.
needed that. So I'm curious your kind of thoughts on this, share. What comes up for you when you hear it?
Yeah. My first thought, like if this was someone that was coming to me and sitting in my office, oh, I would want to explore like what made you feel like you couldn't simply just share it with them? Like why do you need their approval, or why do you need to explain yourself? And just being really curious about, if you want to share why you left it, what's stopping you? What's the fear behind that? Because there could be, and there are legitimate reasons, that are like, well, so this is why I didn't do it. But being able to do a little bit more self-reflection of why they're needing that from them. And if they are needing that, what's stopping you from just, hey, this is why I'm leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that's so important to hear. I I also too like it sounds like this person they say I wish they would leave too. And I would be curious about that. And to me when I read that is probably because there's a lot of angst coming up for you around
Yeah.
this, right? Like you've now discovered that based on your own research that you feel it's a lie, and just uncovering all of that, that has to be distressing. And so of course,
Yeah.
when we're in that amount of distress, we want solidarity. We want other people to come with us. And I talk about this so frequently is we can't convince anybody of anything,
No, no.
right? Like I absolutely think share your perspective if that aligns with you and you feel like you need to share it. But I would invite you to check your intentions for sharing it. Are you sharing it because it's for you? Or are you sharing it because you want to convince them, And I unfortunately I just that's not something that you can make happen. I mean, any of us. I can't you can I mean, even as therapists, right? Our job is not to convince our clients of anything.
No, no. And I think this goes down that that old saying of like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yep.
It's we can share, even as a therapist, right? Like I can share coping tactics. I can share, hey, these are ways that we can process. But if someone's closed off, or they're like, nah, I really don't want to do that, okay, that's about the only answer I can give at that point, because it's not going to do anything helpful or beneficial if I'm trying to force someone to, we're doing EMDR, like you sit down and you get in touch with, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work like that. And I just I understand. I mean, again, I have so much understanding for why this person wants his or her sisters or mom to also leave, right?
Yeah.
It's less lonely. And I also just really invite this person to tune into their own activation around some of this. And I also think that having some open, authentic, honest conversations are so much different than trying to convince people to leave or like wanting them to see that, yeah, the history is not true, right? But being open
Yeah.
about your own personal feelings can be really productive. So this was a really good submission. Okay,
Yeah.
we're kind of running long, but I want to do one more while you're here. If you're okay
Okay.
with that.
Sure.
Okay, I'm 2 years post deconstruction and leaving the Mormon church. During my reconstruction, I was hungry to learn, to replace, and to grow. Lately, though, I feel stuck, aimless, purposeless in my personal growth. How do I move past this? I'm uncomfortable here, and I want to feel the way I felt when I was busy putting all the pieces back together after my world came crashing down. I thought that part was painful, but at least I had direction. This is painful and directionless. I'm lost.
Oh man. First of all, I feel for this person who wrote in, like, it never feels good to feel lost. That's a pretty crappy feeling. Um, what comes to mind when I hear that is, as human beings, like, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, all these different things. And so maybe something to consider, if this person feels like they've done all they need to do with their putting the pieces back together, is start looking to your like spheres of influence. Look at different people that um maybe hold in high regard, or someone that you want to be like, whether it's similar process with the church, or if it's something completely different. But start looking at, what are the other things that they're looking into, that they're exploring, and maybe looking at it from that lens of just finding more connection with people who have had similar situations.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I it's so whenever I read any, and this is just like the therapist in me and the nervous system approach, when I read something like I'm uncomfortable here and I essentially don't want to be here. I don't want to feel this, right? I want it to go away. I want to go back to where I was before. That to me tends to really create that stuck feeling because we're fighting with what's the here and now. It's uncomfortable, it's icky. I want out. I want to flee, which is so valid, part of like the human experience. But I would just really invite you to be super curious about why this is uncomfortable. What is it? What is it bringing up in you? And being open to that, because I think like if we want to get somewhere and we're so focused on like getting somewhere or going back to where we like feeling how we felt, we're missing like whatever information is coming up in the here and now, and it's keeping us from getting to where we need to go. So like just really tuning into what is showing up in the here and now, and giving yourself grace and compassion for that. And I would say, if that is too difficult to sit with, if that is too comfy, it might be a sign to get external support, whether that is with a therapist or that community piece that Emily was sharing, or, just being curious about, what would help me navigate this uncomfy feeling,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I think that that's something I know that even with myself and with my clients, like if you got that feeling of like, I don't like this is uncomfortable, we look for the first thing to change it.
Yeah.
Whether it's, oh, I'm gonna go for a walk. I'm gonna listen to music really loud. I'm gonna, go do whatever. And I think sometimes it is really hard to just sit in the discomfort and be curious about why it's happening.
Yeah. And I just, there's so much that can come from just honoring where you're at right now,
Yeah.
and holding space for it. But we do live in a culture that said like, oh, let's hurry and get rid of it, hurry and get rid of it. And, so sometimes that can be very difficult to do. Um,
Yeah.
well, thank you everyone for your submissions, and keep submitting. I love reading them. I love having my guests and I explore them. And Emily, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for your vulnerability and your authenticity, and just showing up here today and sharing so much of your heart and your soul with us. Your story was very touching and I was very moved by it, and I just appreciate it. I always like to end, if there's any final words or anything you want to say to end this, you don't have to either.
No, I think this has been wonderful. This has been a great experience, and I think that if there's anyone listening, if there's anyone out there that is is worried about judgment, or what should I do, or how do I do this, please just know you're not alone, and there are people out there that are willing to help, and that can be a good fit to help you through that process. And so please never be afraid to find that person. And if you do a little bit of therapist hopping to find the right fit, that is 100% okay, because we've got to feel at least a little bit of comfort while we're going through such uncomfortable topics, because that's how we evolve. That's how we change, and how we grow in feeling empowered and more confident in ourselves. So if there are people out there, there are people there for you.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's where we're going to end today. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If today's content resonated with you, please share, leave a review, all the things. It would mean so much to me.